The series begins with a woman named So Jae-won, who is the CEO of a furniture company. Jae-won has a wonderful husband named Hyo Soon-young, and they have a cute little daughter named Ah-rin. Jae-won seems to have a great career, and her family plays a big part in her success. When Jae-won was a teenager, her mom passed away, so her stepdad raised her and helped her reach her goals. Now, Jae-won's husband helps out a lot at home, especially with taking care of their daughter when she's busy with work. Their family seems really happy and everyone admires how well they get along. One day, Jae-won gets some flowers with a message of support from someone named Ami. She's used to getting messages like this, but this time, it's a bit different. Even though she's not too bothered, she just throws it away with the help of her secretary. Before leaving the office with her secretary, Jae-won goes to the bathroom and takes a pill for her headache. On her way out, she chats with her friend Kwon Yoon-jin, who's painting a mural in the lobby. They're really close and give each other compliments. Yoon-jin thinks Jae-won is like a famous celebrity because of her success, and Jae-won admires Yoon-jin's talent as an artist. During their chat, Jae-won asks about Yoon-jin's housewarming party that she hasn't had yet since moving. Jae-won suspects Yoon-jin might be hiding a boyfriend at her place. Later that evening, Jae-won meets her friend Yoon-tae at the office, and they talk about a new product, a table camera, that's going to be released soon. After Tae leaves, Jae-won stays back to finish her work. While she's alone, a stalker attacks her. There she fights back and manages to protect herself until security arrives. The police find out that Jae-won has been stalked for 7 years, but this is the first time the stalker has attacked her. The next day, Jae-won goes back to her usual routine, acting like nothing happened. While she's out shopping, a man approaches her claiming to be an insurance investigator. He asks about the 500 million won insurance money that Jae-won's stepdad got after her real mom died. The investigator says Jae-won's mom's death was caused by organ damage. He tells Jae-won that before her mom died, she tried to drink pesticide 3 times, which seems really strange. The investigator thinks Jae-won's stepdad might have given her the poison on purpose to get the insurance money. When Jae-won gets back to the office, she finds a parking ticket from the day she was attacked by the stalker. She goes to the parking building to look for the car that matches the ticket. Eventually, she finds a white car and searches it for clues. In the trunk, she finds a black t-shirt that she remembers seeing Tae wearing while he was working out. Meanwhile, Jae-won notices someone walking towards the car, and it turns out to be Tae, which surprises her a lot. Shaking, Jae-won tries to call her husband. Her household assistant tells her that her husband is usually out exercising. Jae-won rushes to follow him, but finds out he's not at any sports club. Jae-won goes back home to track her husband's location. With the help of an expert friend, she finds out where he is using his smartwatch and phone. Following the map, Jae-won ends up back at the sports club building. Feeling confused, Jae-won tries to calm down in the car. From there, she sees her husband waiting for someone in the yard, and soon Yoon-jin arrives, hugging him. The surprises keep coming when she spots Tae at the company's press conference the next evening. Feeling overwhelmed, Jae-won leaves the building but realizes she's being followed. She walks alone until she's cornered on a bridge and falls in the river. The night before, Jae-won had fallen into the water and was still unconscious in the hospital bed, with Soon-young faithfully beside her. After some time, Jae-won woke up, gasping for air, as she had just dreamt of drowning and struggling to breathe. Afterward, Soon-young quickly called the doctors to check on his wife. Meanwhile, Yoon-jin was in the kitchen making breakfast when a man who looked like Soon-young walked in. At that time, Yoon-jin warmly invited him to join her, even giving him a hug, but he refused because he had to leave right away. On the other hand, after what happened to Jae-won, a man named Kwon Young-ik, who's a shareholder in Drev and the chairman of the Art Scholarship Foundation, visited Jae-won's office to check on things. There, Young-ik met Yoon-jin, who was painting there, and they ended up arguing a bit. Young-ik felt like he was wasting money sending his daughter abroad for studies, especially since Yoon-jin's career as an artist hadn't made her famous. On the other hand, Yoon-jin felt her dad never appreciated her hard work and only compared her to Jae-won. The next day, Yoon-jin, who's in love, is having a bonfire with a man who looks like Soon-young. She wonders if they had met years ago, maybe they would have had a child by now. Yoon-jin imagines having a beautiful daughter, but the man doesn't seem interested and gets a message on his phone, ending their conversation. The next morning, Jae-won went back to her usual routine, but she couldn't shake off her suspicions about the people around her. Even her husband's gentle touch made her uneasy, as she kept imagining Yoon-jin hugging a man who looked like him. Then Jae-won tried to ask her husband about his whereabouts, but his response only confused her more. Meanwhile, at work, Jae-won became suspicious of everyone, especially Tae-oh and Yoon-jin. Even though they tried to be friendly, Jae-won's attitude towards them became distant. Just when she was still feeling wary, Jae-won received a delivery of broth soup from her stepdad. She remembered what the insurance officer had said about her stepdad possibly poisoning her mother with pesticide, so she threw the soup away. When feeling down, Jae-won usually talks to a colleague who's a psychiatrist. They have light conversations over tea, and Jae-won shares what's been bothering her while her friend listens and offers advice. In her next meeting with Tae-ju, Jae-won reveals that she knows about his past before he became an insurance officer. It turns out that Tae-ju used to be a police detective, but quit after being involved in a bribery case. Jae-won then offered Tae-ju to help investigate his mother's death, not because of Tae-ju's interests, but for her own, including looking into Tae-oh's background. While they were talking, someone was secretly taking photos of them with their phone. Meanwhile, Tae-oh knows that Jae-won is suspicious of him and tries to regain her trust. He explains his whereabouts during the incident and invites her to his workshop to make her feel better.
좋아요. 일단 입어요. 됐어요?
아니 천만 단기라고 프레임은
국대 들어갈 실력이면 재능 없다고는 못할 것 같은데요.
On the way to Tae-oh's workshop, Jae-won runs into her stepdad, who brings her favorite dish. This reminds her of her past visits to the psychiatrist with her stepdad by her side. The next day, Tae-ju told Jae-won what he found out about Tae-oh. Turns out Tae-oh is originally from America and came to Korea 7 years ago, just before joining Drev. Even though he was born in Korea, he was adopted by an American family. Later, Jae-won realizes Irene isn't home yet. The school says she left earlier with her dad and another woman. Panicked, Jae-won rushes to Yoon-jin's apartment, thinking her daughter might be there with her husband. At that time, she tries to get in, but no one answers. In the evening, Jae-won finally finds her daughter at home with her husband, making her annoyed with Soon-young for making her worry all day. But what annoys her even more is feeling like someone is playing games with her. In the morning, Jae-won got some documents delivered by a courier. It said her dad got a 500 million won insurance payout. There was also a rental contract for a house with someone named Hwan Yoon-jin as the tenant. Soon after, Jae-won rushed to that address and saw Yoon-jin going into the house with her shopping. At the same time, her husband and daughter got out of a taxi. At that time, Jae-won remembered the day Irene was born. She felt weak but walked down the hospital corridor to see her daughter in Soon-young's arms. Soon-young looked so happy. Jae-won talked to him about a friend who was cheated on by her husband, wanting to see his reaction and reassure him she'd never cheat. Later, in Irene's room, Jae-won asked where they went that afternoon. Irene said her dad took her to meet a friend, but they had the wrong address, so they came back home. This confused Jae-won even more, with what she saw earlier conflicting with what her daughter said. To figure out what's going on, Jae-won set up a hidden camera in the living room connected to her phone. She also decided Irene would be homeschooled, despite Soon-young's objections. At night, Tae-oh met Yoon-jin again and warned her that he knew about her relationship with Jae-won's husband. But Yoon-jin assured him she wasn't dating Jae-won's husband. On the other hand, Jae-won, who's been friends with Yoon-jin for 20 years, started to dislike her. She was short with her and even said she didn't like the mural Yoon-jin painted. Their conversations got heated. Meanwhile, Tae-ju gave Jae-won her mother's medical records. It showed her mother had been to the hospital 4 times for pesticide poisoning. Jae-won then went to Wonju Island to meet her stepdad. She remembered a time when she was little and broke some toys in a shop. The owner scolded her and blamed her mom for not looking after her because she was gambling. Thankfully, her dad always stood up for her. Soon after, Jae-won talked to her dad about the insurance people coming over. Her dad then brought up something about Jae-won's biological mom liking to gamble. Sometimes when she didn't get money from Jae-won's dad, she'd threaten to hurt herself. Whenever she ran out of money, she'd drink poison and threaten to end her life. This led to Jae-won's mother often ending up in the hospital. Meanwhile, Tae-oh and his team were looking at footage from a camera near where something bad happened. They saw the person who snuck into the office. Turns out it was someone who worked for Drev named Baek Sun-kyu. There, Teo thought Sung-kyu might know Jae-won's schedule because of a connection with Jae-won's secretary. Knowing Jae-won was heading to Wonju Island, Teo followed. Later that day, Jae-won was driving home when a big truck got in the way, causing her car to lose control and the brakes to get messed up. But just in time, Teo's car came and blocked her, saving her from a bad crash. There, Jae-won thanked Teo, but also said she couldn't trust anyone, not even herself. The next day, Teo went to Sung-kyu's apartment. But before he reached Sung-kyu's floor, he saw paramedics carrying someone who had fallen from the building's roof, and it was Sung-kyu. Soon after, Teo went with him to the hospital. While Sung-kyu was in surgery, Teo checked his stuff from the hospital, finding a phone. Suddenly, Sung-kyu's phone buzzed. Teo answered and heard Soon-young's voice. Meanwhile, Jae-won was at work in her office, looking at a table design. She tried to piece together clues about all the bad stuff that had been happening. But the more she thought, the more confused she got. She felt like someone was messing with her and took some headache medicine. Soon after, her phone rang with a message. It was a photo of her at a party with a message asking if she remembered what happened then. Again, it was from Amy, the person causing trouble for Jae-won. During a big event where a company is showing off a new product, Jae-won seemed lost and unsure when facing the reporters. At that time, Teo noticed this and stopped Jae-won from going out in front of the reporters. He even got someone else to take Jae-won's place. Later, Teo talked to Jae-won and mentioned that he knew that the medicine Jae-won usually takes for headaches is not normal medicine. Jae-won was shocked because nobody else knew this secret, not even family. The next day, a neighbor told Jae-won that she saw a man who looked like her husband entering their house, but he didn't wear glasses like he usually does. His behavior was odd too, and he didn't greet Jae-won like usual. This made her even more confused. While busy with work, Jae-won checked the security footage from her house and saw her daughter playing with her dad. But at the same time, she saw Soon-young, her husband, talking to him. Seeing the same people in different places added to her confusion. Full of worry, Jae-won hurriedly left work and raced home to check on Irene, who was sleeping peacefully. Feeling a mix of relief and surprise, Jae-won tried to stay calm and asked the maid and her husband what happened. According to Soon-young, Jae-won herself had sent a message asking him to come home and let the maid take care of Irene. Jae-won was getting more and more confused and felt like she was in a strange situation she couldn't understand. Finally, Jae-won told Soon-young that she would find Chae-young, his long-lost twin brother. Soon-young was confused because he and his twin had been separated since they were 13 when their parents split up. He hadn't even thought about his twin for years. Meanwhile, at a cafe, Yoon-jin was drawing a picture of Irene. There, the cafe workers saw the drawing and praised it, asking who Yoon-jin was drawing. Yoon-jin claimed Irene as her own daughter. Yoon-jin then remembered an earlier incident when she had been in pain, clutching her stomach while lying on the floor. On another note, Jae-won knows that Teo is investigating what happened that night, so she pushes Teo to spill all the details he knows. After a bit of back and forth, Teo reveals that the person who broke into the office that night was Sung-kyu. Surprisingly, Soon-young even called Sung-kyu while the guy was having surgery. Then Jae-won asks Tae-ju to find out where Chae-young is. But Tae-ju explains that Chae-young has been getting treatment at a clinic for a lung problem. The last time he went was in 2015, and since then, there's been no word. Chae-young might have gone to a place for people without families, but according to the clinic, he always came alone, without any family. While Tae-ju is on the phone, someone who looks like Soon-young is spotted watching him from a car. Now, Jae-won's relationship with Soon-young is getting more strained. She even put CCTV cameras all around the house, which made Soon-young uncomfortable. Soon-young asks her what's been going on with her lately. Meanwhile, Teo talks to Soon-young to figure out his connection with Sung-kyu. Soon-young admits knowing Sung-kyu and says he called him that night. He explains that Sung-kyu actually called him for help. On another note, Director Derive had a meeting with Young-ik to talk about the company's situation. He tried to make Young-ik doubt Jae-won by mentioning the drop in sales and Jae-won's odd behavior since the incident. But Young-ik didn't waver. He trusted Jae-won to handle things. Then the chief's secretary brought up a report about an upcoming news article. It was about the possibility of the leader being nominated as Minister of Culture and Sports. That morning, Jae-won was getting ready for work, making sure to take her headache medicine. Soon after, she met Irene and Soon-young in the dining room, and their conversation seemed warm. Soon-young even hugged Jae-won, and the family appeared very happy. They were actually filming for a family TV show. To fulfill Jae-won's request to find out about Chae-young, Tae-ju met with a former police colleague. But the colleague didn't like Tae-ju always asking for police information. Before leaving, Tae-ju threatened his colleague to keep quiet or he'd get fired from the police force. Thanks to the family TV show featuring Jae-won's family, Derive's sales shot up. They were swept with orders from distributors. Based on Tae-ju's information, Jae-won went to an orphanage with Tae-oh. There she found out that her husband's twin brother had passed away. On the way home, Jae-won told Tae-oh that she didn't really know the people around her, not even those closest to her at the moment. At night, Jae-won invited Yoon-jin's family over for dinner. Soon-young was there too. There, Jae-won told everyone that Yoon-jin had a boyfriend who looked a lot like her husband. They seemed surprised, but Jae-won quickly clarified that it was just a coincidence. Her comments seemed to annoy Soon-young and Yoon-jin. After upsetting Soon-young and Yoon-jin, Jae-won argued with her husband again. She demanded to know who he really was. Either he was Soon-young or Chae-young. She asked Soon-young to break up with Yoon-jin. But there, Soon-young seemed confused, as if he didn't understand Jae-won's feelings. Calmly, he confessed that he had been dating Yoon-jin for a while. It turns out, 3 months ago, they rented a house under Jae-won's dad's name to spend time together like a family. Soon-young used Chae-young's identity on purpose to avoid being exposed, especially since his wife is quite famous. Jae-won was hysterical when she heard this. She asked Soon-young why he could do this, especially since she had always worked hard for the family. Soon-young then suggested they divorce and he'd take Irene with him. They had a huge argument, and Jae-won lost control, throwing things around. As usual, when Jae-won was feeling down, she talked to her friend who's a psychiatrist. She shared about the time when Irene was born. Jae-won felt scared and unsure of herself then, but Soon-young reassured her that he'd always be there for her. Jae-won also mentioned how she always tries hard to overcome tough situations, like when she saw her mother in a scary situation. Soon after, Soon-young met with a friend who's a law professor. He wanted help arranging a divorce from Jae-won and getting custody of their daughter. He also visited Irene at her grandpa's house and talked with Jae-won's dad, who's thankful for Jae-won having a caring husband. Meanwhile, Jae-won met with a divorce advisor to talk about getting custody of Irene. The advisor said the judge might favor Soon-young for custody, unless Jae-won can prove he's been unfaithful. When Jae-won got home, she searched the office for evidence. She checked Soon-young's computer and found a video of him kissing Yoon-jin on a bed. In the evening, Jae-won decided to confront Soon-young and tell him she agreed to the divorce, willing to give him everything he wanted. She invited him for a drink as a sign of agreement. In her imagination, she even pictured Soon-young collapsing after drinking the wine mixed with pesticide. But in reality, none of this happened. Jae-won's stepdad took Irene home and noticed Jae-won feeling down, despite her efforts to hide it. This reminded Jae-won's stepdad of a time when the school called him about Jae-won always getting into trouble. He believes Jae-won did nothing wrong, cause it's those treating her unfairly who have the problem. He remembered how Jae-won was bullied by her friends in the school warehouse, with one student even hurting her wrist while others watched. Again and again, he came to rescue Jae-won. Jae-won then asked her stepdad not to take her to a psychiatrist anymore. He agreed and promised to take her somewhere where nobody knows them. He'll also change Jae-won's name, which used to be Yoon-jin, to protect her. Soon after, Jae-won went to a place with her secretary and bumped into Tae-oh there. As she was leaving, Jae-won suddenly remembered something and hurried to the backyard where she met Tae-oh again. This jogged her memory about their first meeting 7 years ago, before she joined the company. Back then, Tae-oh was an art student and saw Jae-won with headache pills. That's when Tae-oh found out about the medicine Jae-won usually takes. They had a casual chat in the backyard, and Jae-won felt embarrassed that her secret was out. To comfort her, Tae-oh confessed that he had also taken the same medicine when he studied in America, because he couldn't handle the pressure from bullying. Since then, he wanted to meet Jae-won again and work together at the rave. Later, Jae-won got a call from Irene's teacher asking to meet. The teacher said someone claimed they would marry Ireen's dad and pick her up from school. Jae-won was shocked and hurt by her husband and best friend's betrayal. She vowed to get back at them for trying to take Ireen away. In the end, Yoon-jin finished her mural painting. Jae-won kept his promise and threw a party, inviting some journalists. But before the party, Yoon-jin met Soon-young to celebrate alone.
참석해주셔서 감사합니다. 고뇌와 번민으로 붓을 잡는 저에게.
After a short speech from Yoon-jin, it was Jae-won's turn to give her a gift. Instead of something nice, Jae-won insulted Yoon-jin by giving her a bag of money. Then, Jae-won made some speeches, saying she wanted to change the mural according to her taste. She shocked everyone by throwing black paint at the mural.
뭐 하는 거야? 야, 서재원, 이거 봐.
Later, Jae-won searched through her cupboard and found an envelope. She opened it and was surprised by what she read. Sometime before, Soon-young had opened the same envelope and was shocked too. Ireen came over, and Soon-young couldn't hold back his tears. He hugged her and cried. Meanwhile, Dariv threw a party to celebrate Yoon-jin's mural artwork. But at Soon-young's house, police showed up. He was accused of trying to leak Dariv's designs. It turns out, this was Jae-won's plan to get Soon-young arrested so she could get custody of Ireen. That night, Jae-won and Soon-young argued again, and Jae-won asked him to leave. On top of that, news about Jae-won's designs being leaked spread everywhere. The next morning, before leaving for the office, Jae-won took medicine from a safe and put a sticker on it that said headache medicine. Feeling overwhelmed by Jae-won, Yoon-jin decided to visit Ireen at her house. She dressed exactly like Jae-won and greeted Ireen with a smile. At the same time, Jae-won's dad finally reached Jae-won and told her that Ireen was crying at home. Jae-won rushed home, but Ireen didn't say why she was crying, confusing everyone. Soon-young arrived and immediately comforted Ireen. Eventually, Jae-won allowed Soon-young to stay overnight for Ireen's sake. To cope with stress, Jae-won took a double dose of pills, despite her psychiatrist friend warning her about the risks of taking too much medication. The next day, Jae-won went to see the divorce advisor again. The advisor explained that they need medical records to check for any history of mental health issues. If one of the parties has mental health problems, it could be a strong reason for divorce and affect child custody. This news made Jae-won panic even more. She quickly hid the medicine bottles in her safe, but Soon-young was standing behind her. He asked if she was looking for something, just like he used to when they were dating. Back then, Soon-young told a story about a failed marriage because the bride was taking medication for depression. That's why Jae-won hid her medication from Soon-young, afraid he would leave her if he found out. Fortunately, Soon-young didn't see Jae-won's bottle. He asked once again to take care of Ireen while Jae-won worked, saying he's the best option since they can't leave Ireen with a stranger. But Jae-won couldn't trust Soon-young anymore. She felt he had changed a lot from the person she knew. Then Jae-won begged Soon-young to tell her why he changed and what mistakes she made to make him act so differently. Out of the blue, Soon-young admitted that he actually wished Jae-won would suffer. Hearing this, Jae-won realized he was the cause of all their problems, but she couldn't remember what led to this. Her memories took her back to when her birth mother held her while walking by the cold sea waves. Meanwhile, Yoon-jin visited Jae-won's office to talk about their collaboration contract. At first, Jae-won intended to give it to Yoon-jin, but after arguing, Jae-won changed her mind. Yoon-jin complained about her dad always praising her excessively. Soon after, Jae-won was invited by young Ik to a scholarship award ceremony. Before it began, Jae-won met Tae-ju, who handed over Soon-young's phone history and financial records. There, Tae-ju said Tae-oh already knew about Jae-won's plan regarding the design leak, and that Jae-won used Tae-oh's design as a tool. Then Young-ik asked Jae-won to give a speech as an alumni who received a foundation scholarship. Initially, Jae-won planned to use this moment to embarrass Soon-young and Yoon-jin. During a press conference, reporters asked Jae-won about her husband's involvement in the design leak. Before Jae-won could respond, a terrifying message from someone named AMI appeared on her phone. The message was threatening and included a picture of Jae-won on stage. Confused and scared, she looked around, trying to figure out who sent it. In the end, she decided to leave the conference. After Jae-won left, Soon-young talked to Yoon-jin about finding his cell phone in his car. Yoon-jin didn't recognize it. When Soon-young asked about Sung-kyu's name on the call list, Yoon-jin said she didn't know him. But Soon-young mentioned that Sung-kyu was one of the scholarship alumni. Soon after, Jae-won checked Soon-young's phone history and found a suspicious number. She called it and discovered it belonged to a company called Dorinbio, which offers DNA testing services anonymously. The results can be sent to any address. After that, Jae-won rushed to check some documents in her cupboard. Meanwhile, Soon-young is at home, calling Sung-kyu. They talk about their jobs and relationships. While on the call, Soon-young notices an email notification on his computer. It says Irene might not be his child. With the help of a student skilled in it, Soon-young tries to find out who sent the email, but they can't trace it. The email also has a photo of Jae-won walking with another man into a hotel room. After much thought, Soon-young decides to do a DNA test. He reads the results from Dorinbio, which say Irene's genetics match Jae-won's by 99%, but not Soon-young's. From then on, he is determined to make Jae-won doubt those around her. He starts dating Yoon-jin to make Jae-won feel the pain of betrayal. When Jae-won learns the DNA test results, she breaks down again. She leaves her office unsteadily. Worried, her secretary calls Tae-oh. Upon knowing that Tae-oh, who's in a meeting, rushes to find Jae-won. He waits in her yard, guarding her. Unexpectedly, he encounters a reporter who's been bothering Jae-won. The reporter says Jae-won is crazy, which makes Tae-oh angry, and he hits him. Meanwhile, Chairman Young-ik is having a meeting with his team to prepare for his trial as a candidate for minister. One of his team members suggests taking control of Derive because he has a big stake there. They're concerned about Jae-won's divorce issue as CEO of Derive. During a break, Tae-ju talks to Chairman Young-ik about keeping an eye on Tae-oh, who is investigating the Sung-kyu case. Soon after, the chairman's secretary gives Tae-ju a bag of cash. On the other hand, Soon-young and Jae-won sit together at the dining table. There, he can't understand how Jae-won didn't know Irene wasn't his daughter. But then, Jae-won tries to remember what happened 7 years ago at a Derive party. That night, Jae-won got really drunk and ended up in a hotel room, without knowing who drove him there. All she remembers is getting a call from her husband asking where she was. Back then, Jae-won never imagined Irene wasn't Soon-young's daughter. This revelation makes him furious, and Jae-won feels like her world is crashing down. She can only bow her head, cry, and apologize. On the other hand, Tae-oh uses his skills to meet with Tae-ju and his police colleagues. From their conversation, Tae-oh learns they're hiding evidence related to the Sung-kyu incident. When questioned, the police officer revealed Chairman Young-ik's involvement in the incident because his daughter's face was caught on CCTV. On the night of Sung-kyu's fall, Yoon-jin visited him. They'd argued because Sung-kyu asked Yoon-jin to stop making him wait for Jae-won. Yoon-jin refused and insulted Sung-kyu, calling him trash. Sung-kyu got angry and tried to harm Yoon-jin, but he slipped and fell from the building. Panicked, Yoon-jin called Chairman Young-ik for help. Meanwhile, at the university, Soon-young found a cell phone in his car registered under Chae-young's name. Shortly after, Yoon-jin visited with a gift for Irene. Soon-young asked about her relationship with Sung-kyu, but Yoon-jin made up a story, claiming Sung-kyu was blackmailing her. Then, Soon-young ended their relationship and warned her not to come to Irene's school again. On the other hand, Chairman Young-ik's secretary met Yoon-jin and warned her about Tae-ju. They discussed how Yoon-jin helped treat the secretary's son, tying him to her favor. The secretary likened Yoon-jin to her dad, who manipulated people with favors before later taking advantage of them. This paralleled Chairman Young-ik's actions toward Jae-won. Then a letter from the family court sat on the table. Soon-young and Jae-won discussed their divorce. Jae-won agreed to grant all of Soon-young's wishes except for taking Irene. They couldn't reach an agreement. In the evening, Jae-won went to her dad's house. She blamed herself, not Soon-young, for the divorce. Her dad advised her against doing anything bad, reminding her of her mother's mistakes. They remembered the past when Jae-won's mother used him to borrow money from loan sharks, and her dad saved her. On her way home, Jae-won thought about how she and Irene were both raised by men who weren't their biological dads. Her dad always came to her rescue, just like Soon-young took care of Irene. As rain poured down, Jae-won got out of her car and walked aimlessly. Eventually, she returned home drenched. Kneeling on the floor, she agreed to let Irene stay with Soon-young. Tearfully, she asked Soon-young to take good care of their daughter. At that moment, Soon-young was moved by her words. In his study, Soon-young checks the cell phone he found in the car. He discovers a recording of a conversation between Yoon-jin and Chairman Young-ik on the night of Sung-kyu's fall. That morning, before heading to the office, Jae-won made breakfast for Soon-young. Once again, Soon-young was surprised by Jae-won's behavior. Jae-won admitted that she had lost her muscle medicine, but Soon-young found the bottle in the refrigerator. Soon-young took the medicine and then asked his dad-in-law about Jae-won's true condition. He learned about the medicine Jae-won had been taking and asked about the scar on her wrist, but didn't get an answer. Finally, Soon-young visited a doctor to learn more about Jae-won's medication, but the doctor refused to explain without Jae-won present. There, Soon-young tried to explain his wife's condition, hoping for cooperation, but the doctor only said Jae-won needed intensive care at a mental hospital. Soon after, Jae-won reached out to Yoon-jin to sign a work contract. She acted friendly, confusing Yoon-jin. Shortly after, Jae-won's secretary called Tae-oh to update him on his boss's situation. After disappearing for a few days, Jae-won returned with odd behavior, puzzling everyone. Tae-oh rushed back to the office upon hearing this. There he encountered Yoon-jin and asked why she was there. Yoon-jin sarcastically replied that she was hired as an artist at Derive by Jae-won herself. She revealed that Jae-won was going through a tough time, that her husband was cheating with her best friend, and she had lost her memory. Then Tae-oh observed Jae-won's behavior while working and realized the truth behind Yoon-jin's words about Jae-won's memory loss. Meanwhile, Soon-young couldn't stop pondering over Jae-won and the pain he caused her. Eventually, he understood why Jae-won couldn't recall events from 7 years ago. Due to her mental state, Jae-won coped by erasing memories to avoid facing reality. The more Soon-young thought about it, the more he cried in sadness. When Soon-young arrived home, he was surprised to find Jae-won, and Irene had prepared a birthday surprise for him. Feeling emotional, Soon-young stepped out of the house to avoid crying in front of Irene. Shortly after, Jae-won followed him, and Soon-young handed her the medicine bottle, questioning why she had kept it hidden all this time. Jae-won explained that she didn't want to burden Soon-young with her struggles for the rest of their lives. This revelation saddened him deeply. He had no idea about Jae-won's inner turmoil and worries. Determined to uncover the truth, Soon-young decided to investigate what happened 7 years ago. He aimed to find DNA samples that matched Irene's to unravel the mystery. Soon-young then examined the guest list from that night's event. Secretly, he collected DNA samples from each attendee. He also sought Tae-oh's help in identifying a guest whose name wasn't on the list. It turned out to be Kim Sung-gun, Yoon-jin's former fiancé. In another encounter, Soon-young confronted Yoon-jin and played the recording he found on his phone. He warned Yoon-jin against harming Jae-won. Although Yoon-jin appeared calm inside, she was seething with anger and thoughts of revenge. Meanwhile, in Jae-won's office, Yoon-jin pretends to be a supportive friend. She asks Jae-won if he's facing any problems. Jae-won innocently mentions that Soon-young knows about her illness, which has been making her feel down lately. Yoon-jin suggests they visit their old school to reminisce. Initially hesitant, Jae-won eventually agrees after Yoon-jin persuades her. Before heading to their school, they chat at a cafe. Jae-won mentions that the cafe is close to Irene's school. Yoon-jin, who already knows this, pretends to be unaware. In reality, Yoon-jin had been at the cafe the day before, watching Irene play at school. As they stroll by a lake, Jae-won asks Yoon-jin about her dreams and wishes from their school days. Yoon-jin admits she wanted to be like Jae-won because she seemed to have everything Yoon-jin lacked. While talking, Yoon-jin becomes emotional, recalling an incident from 7 years ago. She remembers seeing her boyfriend, Sung-gun, embracing a drunk Jae-won in a hotel room, which led to her miscarriage. Suddenly, Soon-young calls Jae-won, asking where she is. Jae-won simply says she's out for a walk, omitting that she's with Yoon-jin. There she found news about her divorce, and the design leaks by Soon-young. Unable to accept this reality, Jae-won met with her psychiatrist friend to share her feelings. She expressed feeling disconnected from herself and mentioned mental disorders. From their conversation, the psychiatrist concluded that Jae-won was expending energy on repressed memories, leading to forgetfulness and restlessness. Soon after, Soon-young went back to see Yoon-jin and warned her not to disturb Jae-won. However, Yoon-jin blamed Soon-young and claimed that the mistake started with him. Yoon-jin also expressed feeling like a victim in this situation. Initially, Soon-young promised Yoon-jin that they would live happily with Irene, but now he was leaving her and asking her to abandon all plans. Yoon-jin even mentioned that if Soon-young threatened her with a voice recording, she would reveal a secret to Jae-won if Irene wasn't his biological child. The next day, Jae-won found a note in her work agenda book with Num Tae-ju's name and phone number. They met, and Jae-won asked Tae-ju about the note. Tae-ju explained that it was the date when Soon-young was investigated by the police for the Dori design leak case. Jae-won also questioned if her husband was truly responsible. There, Tae-ju explains to Jae-won that her actions seem like an attempt to trap her husband to gain custody of their child. He's surprised by Jae-won's question, especially seeing her confused expression. Jae-won then checks her phone files to confirm. She replays videos of herself damaging Yoon-jin's mural and attending a family show. At home, Jae-won asks her husband who he really is, as she struggles to remember despite trying. She also blames herself for the divorce. At that time, Soon-young can't provide an explanation. There, he simply expresses a desire to protect everyone. Later, Yoon-jin meets Jae-won at the office. Jae-won wonders why Yoon-jin brings up past events she can't recall, suspecting a test. Sarcastically, Yoon-jin suggests that Jae-won always panics and wants to erase memories, as if escaping from reality, and it was a pattern she noticed when Jae-won was 15 and 7 years ago. The next day, Jae-won's dad pays a surprise visit to Soon-young at home. Without many words, he suddenly hits Soon-young. It turns out he's met Yoon-jin, who spilled the beans about her affair with Soon-young. After calming down, he asks Soon-young to keep it a secret from Jae-won, as he doubts her memory will ever fully return, especially since she can't recall events from when she was 15. Meanwhile, Tae-do helps Jae-won with work and mentions he recently saw Soon-young. Tae-do thinks Soon-young genuinely wants to protect Jae-won and advises her to trust him. Later, Soon-young shows up at the office with Irene. There she meets Tae-do, and Soon-young looks uncomfortable seeing Tae-do, with Jae-won after hearing Yoon-jin's claim that Tae-do has liked Jae-won for a while. Despite the tension, Tae-do smiles at the seemingly happy family. Soon after, Jae-won and her family went out to dinner together. They also took Irene to the park, dreaming about her future. But Soon-young expressed uncertainty about being there for Irene in her happy moments as she grows up. This made Jae-won cry. They agreed to focus on the present and not dwell on the past. Meanwhile, Soon-young was seen burning files from Doreen bio. As a sign of support, he offered to accompany Jae-won to the clinic if she wanted to get herself checked, but Jae-won preferred to talk to a psychiatrist for counseling. On the other hand, Tae-ju was investigating Sung-goom. According to his colleague, Sung-goom has a shady past involving a harassment case. Then Tae-ju remembered meeting Sung-goom at the Derive launch party 7 years ago. He's found some crucial information and is thinking about selling it for money. Later, Tae-ju brought some documents to Jae-won, but she wasn't interested in them. Meanwhile, Chairman Young-ik, who has ambitions of becoming a minister, strikes a deal with Sung-goom. This upsets Yoon-jin because she feels her dad didn't consider her feelings when making the deal. On the other hand, Soon-young reads a genetic test report involving Irene and Sung-goom. The report shows their genetics are 99% compatible. Soon after, Soon-young rushes to confront Sung-goom and ends up hitting him. The next day, Soon-young takes Jae-won on a date. They stroll in the park, reminiscing about the past. There, Soon-young tries to reassure Jae-won that everything will be fine. The next day, he meets Yoon-jin and reveals he knows what happened 7 years ago. Yoon-jin blames Jae-won for everything, but Soon-young defends Jae-won, saying it wasn't her wish. Suddenly, Yoon-jin gets angry at Soon-young's defense of Jae-won. She vows to ruin his hopes of happiness with Jae-won. Then Soon-young kneels before Yoon-jin, crying and apologizing, hoping she'll let Jae-won go. However, Yoon-jin becomes even more determined to cause trouble. One day, the police discovered a man's body in an abandoned warehouse. They suspected it was a murder case because they found evidence of poisoning and signs of being tied up. The police searched the area for clues, including finding a smartwatch and a pesticide bottle in the victim's car. Meanwhile, Jae-won was sleeping in her studio, exhausted from trying to remember the past day. She woke up to find police officers surrounding her, revealing her husband's lifeless body. Jae-won was questioned by the police, and Tae-do arranged for a lawyer to help her. In the evening, Chairman Young-ik met with a Congress member to discuss his aspirations for a ministerial position. The Congress member asked why Chairman Young-ik would harm Jae-won. The chairman claimed ignorance, insisting he only learned about it from the news. The Congress member praised Chairman Young-ik's political ambition, and they celebrated together. The next day, Chairman Young-ik got a message from his team about Sung-kyu's situation. They said Sung-kyu wouldn't wake up soon, and they couldn't see him much because the police were watching closely. Meanwhile, Jae-won was still stuck in the police station. She asked Yoon-jin to visit her. At first, Jae-won just paced around, talking to herself. This annoyed Yoon-jin. Finally, Jae-won revealed that she figured out who the real AMI was Yoon-jin herself. At that time, Jae-won couldn't understand why she hadn't realized before, especially since Yoon-jin was always around her. It turned out Yoon-jin wanted what Jae-won had and wanted to take her family. But Yoon-jin acted like she didn't know what Jae-won was talking about. Jae-won also accused Yoon-jin of killing Sun-young. Yoon-jin kept acting clueless until Jae-won said her memory had returned. Eventually, the police let Jae-won go because they didn't have enough proof. Outside the police station, reporters were waiting. Like always, Tae-do was there for Jae-won. But on the way, Jae-won asked Tae-do to stop the car. She got out and started crying, feeling terrible about what happened to Sun-young. While Jae-won stayed at her dad's place that night, Tae-do stayed in the car to keep an eye on her. The next day, Jae-won's dad panicked because he couldn't find her. Tae-do helped him search. With the secretary's help, Tae-do found out Jae-won had taken a bus to Sungcheok. There, Jae-won stood on the beach, remembering her childhood. She recalled her biological mom giving her milk, which made her feel strange. She realized something was wrong, but couldn't resist her mom's wishes. Eventually, she passed out, and her mom carried her into the ocean. As Jae-won relived that horrible memory, she walked toward the water. Suddenly, Tae-do ran to save her, furious about what she was doing. He thought she might want to harm herself, but she denied it. Tae-do told her he wouldn't ask her to care about him, but begged her not to leave his side. Jae-won then asked Tae-do to look after Irene for her. Meanwhile, Tae-ju meets Yoon-jin at his studio. He tells her about Tae-do's relentless search, which annoys him. Yoon-jin warns him not to interfere with Tae-do and just focus on taking care of Jae-won. On another front, a close friend of Sun-young contacts Jae-won and asks to meet. He wants to give her a flash drive Sun-young left with him in case of trouble. Soon after, Jae-won checks it and finds Yoon-jin's voice on it. The police also reach out to Jae-won, revealing the autopsy results for Sun-young. Investigators at the station discuss the time of death, which conflicts with Sun-young's smartwatch. The watch shows his last pulse at 1 a.m., but the autopsy shows he died around 10 p.m. at that time. A female detective finds this odd and speaks up. The next day, Chairman Young-ik visits Reeves' office. Tae-do asks about the closed Busan shop, which was Reeves' first store. But Chairman Young-ik explains that they had to close it to save the company because sales were dropping, especially after an article about Jae-won's mental health was published. He's frustrated about the murder case and asks Tae-do to tell Jae-won to step down as CEO. Later at his place, Chairman Young-ik gives ownership files to Yoon-jin and tells her to attend the shareholder meeting the next day to showcase her skills. At that time, Yoon-jin seems surprised as her dad favors Jae-won. Before the meeting, Yoon-jin talks with Tae-do. He questions her about killing her lover and planning to frame her friend to take over the company. Yoon-jin admits to feeling good about it. Upon hearing that, Tae-do warns her that she'll ruin her own life. He reminds her that he was there for her when she was struggling. Tae-do regrets holding Yoon-jin's hand years ago when she tried to harm herself. Next, Tae-do visits Dr. Cha, who happens to be Jae-won's friend's psychiatrist. Dr. Cha is surprised by Tae-do's visit, as she doesn't recall having a patient named So Jae-won or being friends with him. They'd never met before. Soon after, Tae-do informs Jae-won about this strange situation. Jae-won, feeling uneasy, vaguely remembers Dr. Cha. Fearing for her mental health, Jae-won decides to admit herself to a mental hospital. This meeting with Dr. Cha makes her realize how serious her condition has become. Meanwhile, the shareholder meeting goes smoothly, and Yoon-jin becomes the new CEO. Tae-do, working at his desk, can't help but glance away when he sees Yoon-jin. Meanwhile, Chairman Young-ik now serves as a minister. He meets with Yoon-jin and Mr. Park, both now leaders at Rev. The minister worries about Jae-won causing trouble, but Yoon-jin assures him that Jae-won, locked up in a mental hospital, won't be able to do anything. Chairman Young-ik also promises Yoon-jin to find evidence of the recording, as its release could threaten their positions. During the counseling session, the doctor asked Jae-won about the night she fell into the river. One question was why she didn't report it to the police. Jae-won thought it could have been her husband, dad, or maybe Yoon-jin, so she wasn't sure. The doctor also asked about Jae-won's meeting with Dr. Cha. At first, Jae-won was confused by all the questions, but then she started to realize something. Turns out she'd been lying to herself. That night by the river, she was alone, no one was after her. And seeing Dr. Cho was just her mind playing tricks, trying to protect her. A few days later, Tae-oh visits Jae-won in the hospital. He's glad to see her looking healthy and comfortable, no longer in isolation. Soon after, Tae-oh shows Jae-won a photo of Irene and tells her that his younger sister came from USA to meet Irene. They're getting to know each other so Irene will feel comfortable when she moves to America later. They plan to leave Irene with Tae-oh's parents. At a store, Yoon-jin buys some children's toys. You can see the toys pile up in her studio. The next day, Yoon-jin meets Irene, who is playing alone, and gives her a toy. At that time, Jae-won's dad warns Yoon-jin to stay away from Irene. Because of her, they rush Irene's departure to America. Before Irene boards the plane, Jae-won has a video call with her. Through Tae-ju, Yoon-jin learns about Irene leaving, which she expected. Tae-ju is surprised that Yoon-jin wanted to take Irene. To Yoon-jin, Irene should have been her daughter from the beginning. Tae-ju also warns Yoon-jin to be careful with Detective Oh Soo-jin, who's handling Soon-young's murder case. Jae-won sees a counselor. After checking her, she's allowed to go home. Still at the hospital, Detective Soo-jin meets Jae-won and wants to ask questions, but Jae-won refuses. The detective told Jae-won that the day before Soon-young died, he had a fight with Sung-goom. Jae-won was surprised to hear this and started piecing together facts she gathered. Eventually, she realized everything stemmed from an incident 7 years ago at a Derev event. That evening, Jae-won worked out and visited Derev's office. She noticed many changes there. Tae-oh was thrilled to see Jae-won and kept saying her name happily. Jae-won tried to ignore him. Tae-oh then took Jae-won to her house and found her place in a mess. There were papers all over the floor and a family photo covered with a cloth. Tae-oh was even more surprised to see Jae-won's workspace filled with photos and files about someone he suspected. Jae-won asked him to help her uncover the truth about everything. Without hesitation, Tae-oh agreed, despite Jae-won's warning that he might get hurt. Jae-won then met a woman who was Sung-goom's wife. While she was still in a mental hospital, Jae-won wrote her a letter, asking to work together to expose Sung-goom's crime. At first, the woman was unsure, but because the violence she faced was getting worse, she decided to help Jae-won. She gave her an envelope containing data about clinical trial manipulation done by her husband. Later, Sung-goom was interrogated at the police station. Like before, he underestimated the prosecutor and thought he'd be released as usual. Meanwhile, Young-ik, who was connected to Sung-goom, panicked upon hearing about his arrest. His employee reminded him that Sung-goom might mention his name during interrogation. As expected, Sung-goom was released. This time, Young-ik sent Derev employees to buy back shares owned by Sung-goom. Sung-goom is shown signing a document to transfer shares, and in return, he's released from the police station. As he leaves, a man in a hat follows him. Sung-goom goes to a club to have fun. The man in the hat, disguised as a waiter, swaps Sung-goom's drink with one filled with drugs. Soon after, Sung-goom gets really drunk and staggers toward his car. Suddenly, another car hits him, crushing him among parked cars. Tae-ju meets Minister Young-ik and hands over a letter Jae-won wrote to Kim Miso, Sung-goom's wife. There, Tae-ju also mentions that Miso has left Korea. He tells Minister Young-ik that he won't take any more orders because he's already helped enough by finding Sung-goom. It turns out the person who hit Sung-goom was sent by Kwon Young-ik. Meanwhile, Jae-won, Tae-oh, and Secretary Kim are having dinner to celebrate their progress. Tae-oh didn't expect Minister Young-ik to act so fast. On the other hand, Jae-won, who knows Young-ik well, says he's the type to never admit his mistakes. Young-ik's goal with the foundation is to manipulate people's perceptions of the truth. Successful scholarship recipients are trophies for him, while those who fail end up doing his dirty work, like Jae-won and Sung-kyu. That day, Derev hosted an art exhibition featuring furniture by Yoon-jin. Minister Young-ik was there too. Jae-won also attended and surprised everyone by giving Yoon-jin a bouquet of flowers. Jae-won then told Yoon-jin something she realized while at the police station. At that time, she saw something in Yoon-jin's eyes and face that made her believe Yoon-jin, with Tae-ju's help, was behind Soon-young's demise. Jae-won thought Tae-ju, who was a detective at the time, knew about a warehouse where a murder took place. Yoonjin dismissed Jae-won's accusation as nonsense. Jae-won then hugged Yoonjin with a big smile in front of everyone. Later, Jae-won went to a columbarium and met Detective Soo-jin, who was visiting her old friend's ashes. The detective showed a video of Jae-won pouring paint on Yoonjin's mural. She hoped to get a response from Jae-won, but Jae-won didn't say anything. At night, Jae-won and Tae-oh talked about the person involved in Sun-young's death. Tae-oh learned from one of Yoonjin's friends that she went to a club after 1 a.m., meaning she didn't have an alibi between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. The next day, Jae-won approached Minister Young-ik while he was giving a public lecture on art. She met him in the dressing room and asked if Yoonjin had been doing well. He didn't understand what Jae-won meant. There, Jae-won emphasized that Minister Young-ik was only using him for Yoonjin. Meanwhile, it's revealed that Young-ik was behind the incident 7 years ago that hurt both Jae-won and Yoonjin. He wants Yoonjin to see Sung-boom's true nature and leave him. That's why he set a trap for Jae-won with Sung-boom. Jae-won showed CCTV footage from her home, revealing a man sneaking in. It turns out Tae-ju was waiting for Jae-won. Jae-won, knowing Tae-ju is searching for evidence of the voice recording, offers to exchange evidence. She wants Tae-ju to give her evidence of Young-ik and Yoonjin's crimes in exchange for the voice recording. She even offers money to Tae-ju, but he refuses and tries to harm Jae-won. Luckily, Tae-oh arrives just in time to save her, and a fight breaks out between Tae-oh and Tae-ju. Later, Jae-won meets with the council members who support Minister Young-ik. She brings them an orchid plant as a gift and gives them a file containing data about Young-ik's foundation. Meanwhile, Secretary Kim calls Jae-won and tells her that Sung-kyu has regained consciousness. Jae-won and Tae-oh rush to the hospital. Yoonjin also learns about Sung-kyu's recovery from Tae-ju, but decides not to intervene immediately. That night, a masked man enters the hospital room looking for Sung-kyu but can't find him. He calls Minister Young-ik to report. Meanwhile, news breaks about prosecutors raiding the foundation for embezzlement and corruption charges. Minister Young-ik tries to call Councillor Park for support, but Park ignores him. Soon after, Jae-won goes to Minister Young-ik's office to show him the voice recording evidence he's been searching for. She tells him he has to choose between protecting his political career or Yoonjin. If the evidence is revealed, both Yoonjin and Minister Young-ik will be in trouble. Jae-won then moves Sung-kyu to a heavily guarded villa. Sung-kyu apologizes to Jae-won for his past actions. Later, Jae-won returns home alone. After changing clothes, she goes back to her workspace. Suddenly, a man attacked her and takes her away. Soon after, Jae-won finds herself tied to a chair, with Minister Young-ik standing in front of her. Earlier, Tae-oh and Jae-won had planned Young-ik's moves. When Jae-won approached him with the threat of the voice recording attached to Jae-won's shirt button, Tae-oh disagreed with her plan to use herself as bait. But Jae-won argued it was the only way to expose Young-ik's crime. Soon after, Tae-oh drives his car, following the map to find Jae-won's location. He arrives at an empty warehouse. Inside, Jae-won, still tied up, tries to confront Young-ik. She asks about Sun-young's death, and Young-ik insists it couldn't have been prevented. He believes Jae-won would do anything to protect her loved ones. Furious, Jae-won calls Young-ik a murderer. He killed Sun-young to cover up Yoonjin's actions and smooth his path to becoming a minister. Jae-won can't help but imagine Sun-young's pain from being poisoned by Young-ik. But then Young-ik blames Jae-won for not maintaining her marriage to Sun-young, which would have prevented Yoonjin from dating him. He says if Jae-won hadn't upset Yoonjin, she wouldn't have been involved with Sung-kyu, and there wouldn't have been a recording. He adds that if Jae-won hadn't lost her memory, Sun-young wouldn't have knelt in front of Yoonjin. Despite Jae-won's protests, Young-ik prepares to pour pesticide into her mouth, but Jae-won keeps her mouth shut tightly. Shortly after, Young-ik's friend hits Jae-won until she passes out. Then, Young-ik manages to force open Jae-won's mouth and pour in some poison. Right when things are dire, Tae-oh shows up and saves Jae-won. He fights with Young-ik's friend before the police come, but by then, Young-ik and his friend have run away. Later, Young-ik goes home and meets Yoonjin, who seems suspicious of him. There she thought her dad messed up. She, with a lawyer, gave him a will to sign. It said all his stuff would go to her. At that moment, Young-ik didn't get why his daughter was acting this way. Yoonjin even said her dad was useless now. She warned if he didn't agree, she'd be in danger. She kept trying to explain to her dad that she knew he did everything out of love. That's why he'd hurt her and made her break up with her fiancé. She was stuck cleaning up the mess he made. Meanwhile, Jae-won is in the hospital, lying in bed. Tae-oh stays by her side, even though his face got scratched up in the fight. At that time, Jae-won notices Tae-oh is mad at her. Tae-oh thought she might not make it. Jae-won says sorry for making him worry. Soon after, they watch a video from a camera on Jae-won's shirt. Jae-won thinks about where they should show the video, so they don't miss a chance. The next day, when Jae-won was getting ready to leave the hospital, Detective Soo-jin showed up to talk to her. But Tae-oh stopped her from asking Jae-won any questions because she wasn't feeling well yet. Detective Soo-jin realized they were keeping something secret. Earlier, Tae-oh had told Jae-won that the person who fought him was the same one who broke into Jae-won's house. The following day, there was a meeting with the Minister of Culture and Tourism, where Young-ik got asked about his involvement in Jae-won's case. Jae-won showed up in court and presented evidence from hidden camera recordings. It shocked everyone there. Then, Detective Soo-jin arrested Young-ik. The night before, Tae-oh met with Young-ik's secretary to find out inside info about the ministry. After Young-ik was arrested, Yoon-jin went to the office and sat in the minister's chair. Soon after, Yoon-ik's partner Yoon-jae showed up and Yoon-jin told him to lay low for a while. The next morning, Yoon-jin held a press conference, saying she had nothing to do with her dad's actions and would donate her money to say sorry. Got it. Let me correct that for you. On another note, Tae-ju meets with Yoon-jin and tells her where Sung-kyu is. He wants to know Yoon-jin's plans for Sung-kyu, but she doesn't share them, which annoys Tae-ju. At a villa outside the city, police are guarding the area where Jae-won has hidden Sung-kyu for safety. Sung-kyu's girlfriend, Secretary Kim, is always with her. Jae-won is seen talking to herself while looking at the investigation board. Tae-oh notices Jae-won's behavior as if she's talking to someone else. Finally, Jae-won reveals that Dr. Cha is her imaginary friend. Even though she's out of the mental hospital, sometimes Dr. Cha still appears, especially when Jae-won is feeling down. Tae-oh reassures Jae-won that he'll always be there for her. Tae-oh then tells Detective Soo-jin that Sung-kyu has agreed to testify. That night, Tae-oh, Detective Soo-jin, and Jae-won go to the villa. When they arrive, they see an ambulance and officers carrying Sung-kyu's body. On the other hand, Yoon-jin is walking behind them, her face bruised and bleeding. In the past, Soon-young meets Yoon-jin and apologizes, begging to be accepted into her family. But Yoon-jin doesn't want to see Jae-won happy with Soon-young. If Yoon-jin can't have Soon-young, then nobody else should either. At that time, Young-ik overhears their conversation. After meeting Yoon-jin, Soon-young stops by his friend's place to leave a disc with a voice recording. When Soon-young is about to drive home, Tae-ju surprises him from the back seat, drugging him and taking him to an empty warehouse. Secretly, Tae-ju sets up a hidden camera there. There, Soon-young is shown tied up. Shortly after, Yoon-jin approaches Soon-young before he wakes up. Yoon-jin's accomplice, Yoon-jae, cuts the CCTV cable and attacks the police officers guarding the area. Yoon-jin then enters the villa and meets Sung-kyu in his room. Then Yoon-jin asked Sung-kyu to come with her quietly, but he refused. He reminded Yoon-jin that he'd never be like Jae-won. Yoon-jin's actions were all because she felt inferior to Jae-won and became obsessed with her. Suddenly, Yoon-jin got mad and grabbed a knife, hurting Sung-kyu's neck. There, Sung-kyu tried to stop the bleeding, but he died. Yoon-jin then smeared Sung-kyu's blood on herself and told Yoon-jae to hit and choke her until she looked beaten up. After knowing all the truth, Yoon-jin is in the hospital under police guard. Detective Soo-jin talks to her. Yoon-jin says she wanted to talk to Sung-kyu, but Tae-ju showed up and killed him. But there, Yoon-jin pretended to be Tae-ju's victim. The detective suspects Yoon-jin, but the fingerprints on the knife belonged to Tae-ju. The police searched Tae-ju's place, but he ran away. Meanwhile, Tae-ju is seen opening his car trunk, filled with money, cell phones, and a framed photo. On the other hand, Jae-won is looking at old files with a photo of Tae-ju as a cop, with her mom among the suspects. The next day, online news report about Jae-won's dad allegedly poisoning his wife to claim insurance money. Jae-won's dad has turned himself into the police. Then Jae-won gets a call from Tae-ju. He says Yoon-jin is behind everything and dumped him. At that time, Jae-won finds it hard to believe, so Tae-ju offers evidence to prove it. Meanwhile, Jae-won's dad sits sadly in jail, remembering when his wife died. He didn't rush her to the hospital after she drank poison. It seems like he wanted her to die for Jae-won's sake. Jae-won often suffered because of her mom's actions. At the hospital, the doctor noticed something fishy, but Jae-won's dad stopped him, saying his wife had a weak heart. Soon after, Jae-won talks to her lawyer about her dad's case. The lawyer suggests finding someone who can testify about Jae-won's mom's gambling habit and threats for money. At that time, Jae-won wants to testify, but the lawyer thinks people might doubt her because she was in a mental hospital. Before the trial began, Jae-won was seen meeting Yoon-jin. There, Yoon-jin taunts Jae-won because her dad is also in prison, just like Yoon-jin's dad. But there, Jae-won only said that Yoon-jin would never know the feeling of loving a dad all her life. During her dad's trial, Jae-won discovered the fact that her dad refused her mother's autopsy, and this could incriminate him. On the other hand, Tae-ju kept his promise to give a flash drive containing the video of Sun-young's murder. He also offers to help imprison Yoon-jin and become a witness in her dad's trial. Soon after, he talked about his relationship with Jae-won's mother. Apparently, it was Jae-won's mother who introduced Tae-ju to gambling and got him addicted to the point of spending his wife's medical money. Soon after, Jae-won checked the flash drive and found out that Yoon-jin had told Tae-ju to kidnap Sun-young. Yoon-jin also made the poison. Later, Yeomek arrived, and Yoon-jin argued with him because Sun-young threatened him with a voice recording. He also threatened to ruin Yeomek's political career. But suddenly, Yeomek's man hit Yoon-jin, knocking her out. Soon after, Sun-young woke up from anesthesia and saw Yeomek in front of him. Yeomek asked for the voice recording evidence, but Sun-young refused. There, Yeomek got angry and forced poison into Sun-young's mouth. Jae-won felt sad and angry watching this. Tae-yo quickly closed the computer screen. At the next trial, Jae-won testified for her dad. But because she'd been treated in a mental hospital, the prosecutor doubted her testimony. Unable to bear seeing his daughter questioned like that, Jae-won's dad confessed to killing his wife, shocking everyone in court. Luckily, the lawyer convinced the judge that Jae-won's dad's confession was just emotional. Then, Jae-won talked about her mental illness, which actually affects 30% of people in Korea. But many hide it because society judges and looks down on them. Everyone was quiet, thinking about Jae-won's words. Jae-won's dad remembered his conversation with Sun-young. Sun-young asked about Jae-won's condition, and he mentioned her mental disorder when she was 15. Unfortunately, she didn't see a psychiatrist in time. News about Jae-won's illness spread at school, and she was bullied by friends and even their parents. That's why her dad hid it all this time, not wanting her to go through the same. He apologized to Jae-won for his mistakes, wishing he had taught her to face the world proudly. On the other side, Yoon-jin tells Yoon-jae to find Tae-ju. After thinking for a while, Yoon-jin decides to get rid of Tae-ju quickly before he talks. At night, Yoon-jae finds Tae-ju at a fishing spot. They fight and Yoon-jae stabs Tae-ju with a knife, making him fall into the water. Soon after, Yoon-jae reports back to Yoon-jin. The next day, the trial resumes. Jae-won looks worried because Tae-ju, who she thought would be a witness, hasn't shown up. At that moment, Yoon-jin smirks at Jae-won. Later, Tae-ju enters the courtroom to testify. At first, the prosecutor doesn't want him as a witness because he's a fugitive. But the judge allows it because it's unrelated. Tae-ju says he was friends with Jae-won's mom and explains how she got money from her husband by threatening to drink diluted pesticide. Thanks to Tae-ju's testimony, Jae-won's dad is declared innocent. At that time, Yoon-jin is annoyed to see Tae-ju alive. It turns out the night Yoon-jae stabbed him, Tae-ju pretended to be dead. Yoon-jin is upset with Yoon-jae for failing his mission. She slaps him but then apologizes, realizing he reminds her of his dad. In another place, Tae-ju is already in trouble and locked up. Soon after, Yoon-jin came to talk to him. Yoon-jin said Tae-ju wouldn't be let out because he did something really bad, like kidnapping and murder. But Tae-ju just smiled. Instead of worrying, he asked Yoon-jin to get in $1 million for the rest of the money he owes. The next day, Jae-won's dad throws a big dinner to celebrate him being free. Tae-yo is also there and drinks too much. Tae-yo calls Jae-won's dad as dad and promises to take care of Jae-won. Soon after, Jae-won helps Tae-yo, who is drunk, and listens to him talk about being bullied when he was young. In his story, he told that there's a kid from middle school named Yoon-jin helped Tae-yo. Tae-yo cried and hugged the student, who turned out to be Jae-won before she changed her name. Then he asks for an autograph from her. Jae-won is surprised to learn Tae-yo is the kid she helped. She's happy because she remembers good times from her childhood. Tae-yo thanks Jae-won for saving him. Meanwhile, Yoon-jin gets a message from Jae-won to meet at the spot where Seung-young was killed. Jae-won shows Yoon-jin a video of the murder. She gives this evidence to the police on purpose because she hopes it will help Yoon-jin remember their friendship of over 20 years. Jae-won misses the old Yoon-jin. The next day, Tae-oh is at Jae-won's house helping her clean up. He throws away her investigation papers so she can move on from the past. Meanwhile, in detention, Tae-ju is in bad shape and having seizures. In the hospital, he drugs a police officer to escape. There, he contacts Yoon-jin and asks to meet. He offers Yoon-jin the video of Seung-young's murder in exchange for $1 million. Hearing that Yoon-jin agrees, but the meeting is actually set up by Detective Soo-jin to catch Tae-ju in the act. Soon after, Detectives Soo-jin, Jae-won, and Tae-oh hide in a car while Tae-ju meets Yoon-jin. During their meeting, Tae-ju records their conversation, and Detective Soo-jin overhears it. There, Tae-ju manages to get Yoon-jin to confess about the murders of Sung-kyu and Seung-young. Then she tells Yoon-jae to kill Tae-ju, but Yoon-jae fails and Yoon-jin escapes while Yoon-jae gets arrested. After knowing the truth, Yoon-jin had already stepped down as CEO of Derive before becoming a fugitive. Now Jae-won is back at work as the new CEO. She's busy with her job. Jae-won happily tells Tae-oh that her daughter, Irene, is coming back from USA today. Jae-won is proud of her brave daughter. On the way to pick up Irene, Jae-won suddenly remembers Tae-ju's conversation with Yoon-jin. Yoon-jin apparently wants to take Irene as a victory prize against Jae-won. At the airport, Yoon-jin waits for Irene. Now, Irene is with her. At that time, Yoon-jin says Jae-won is busy, so she asks her to pick up Irene. There, Yoon-jin convinces Irene to surprise Jae-won. Yoon-jin tells Irene that if she had a daughter, she want to share ice cream and chat like they're doing. Yoon-jin feels happy with Irene and wants to see her again. Meanwhile, Detective Soo-jin orders her team to find Irene, who was kidnapped by Yoon-jin. On the other hand, while searching for Irene, Jae-won gets a call from a woman telling her to hurry home. Soon after, Jae-won rushes back and finds Irene there already. She's incredibly relieved and hugs her daughter tightly. Meanwhile, Yoon-jin is about to cross the street when a motorcycle nearly hits her, but she manages to dodge it. However, a truck hits her moments later, sending her flying. Because of that, Yoon-jin dies instantly. A year later, Jae-won meets Dr. Cha, the psychiatrist she's always seen in her hallucinations. At first, Dr. Cha is hesitant to counsel Jae-won, but after learning more about her history, she changes her mind and wants to hear Jae-won's story. Dr. Cha explains that Jae-won's hallucinations depend on how deeply she believes in them. Afterwards, Jae-won is busy leading the Derive company to success. The employees celebrate a new contract, but Jae-won stays in the office. She sends an email to Derive's directors and staff admitting she has a mental illness and made some mistakes with the company. Jae-won apologizes if she ever hurt anyone and decides to resign. Then, Tae-oh takes over as CEO. Soon after, Jae-won takes Irene to her dad's house and asks him to live with them. At first, he refuses, not wanting to be a burden, but Jae-won convinces him. Later, Jae-won visits a temple to pray for her mother. At that time, Irene and Jae-won's dad encourage her to take a vacation. During her break, Jae-won spends time with her imaginary friend. She remembers a question from Dr. Che about her hallucinations and admits she's always with her imaginary friend, along with her mother. During their counseling sessions, Dr. Che advises Jae-won to confront the hatred she feels, which is linked to her mother. Jae-won is still haunted by a trauma from when she was 8 years old. She wonders why her mother attempted something so terrible back then. In her mind, Jae-won's mother explains that life was incredibly hard at the time. Tearfully, Jae-won expresses her desire to be with both her parents. In her illusions, Jae-won's mother apologizes and acknowledges her mistakes, urging Jae-won to let go of the painful memories and move forward happily. At the next counseling session, Jae-won shares her imaginary conversations. Dr. Che praises Jae-won's progress, recognizing that it's a crucial step in healing from past trauma. After much thought, Jae-won takes Irene to visit her dad. Initially, Irene is upset realizing her dad is gone forever, but Jae-won comforts her and tries to help her understand. Meanwhile, Derive, now under Tae-oh's leadership, is making fast progress. Tae-oh is getting a lot of support from the employees. Derive is getting contracts with freelance designers. Tae-oh wants to meet one of these designers, but when he sets up the meeting, the designer keeps him waiting for a long time, which annoys him. However, Secretary Kim assures him that it will be worth it when he finally meets the designer. It turns out the designer is Jae-won. During a break, Jae-won decides to go back to work at Duraev as a freelance designer. Tae-do is thrilled to work with her again. Then he tries hard to get her attention, even though Jae-won doesn't really respond. Most of the staff know about Taeyo's efforts to get close to Jae-won. Soon after, Secretary Kim arranges for Tae-do and Jae-won to go on a trip out of town together. By the lake, Tae-do and Jae-won talk. At that time, Tae-do dreams of a future together, living in a house by the lake, raising kids and making furniture. Jae-won responds calmly to his words. Then, Tae-do presses Jae-won to respond. But there, Jae-won reminds Tae-do about her mental illness. However, Tae-do doesn't see Jae-won that way. He only sees her positively, overcoming her struggles. At that time, Jae-won asks Tae-do to wait, and happily Tae-do agrees, even if it takes years. Finally, she realizes that life doesn't always have a happy ending cause there's only happiness today or the hope for tomorrow. The series ends. The moral lesson from this series is if you're gonna dream big, make sure your dream house by the lake has good Wi-Fi. And remember, even if life doesn't always have a happy ending, there's always ice cream.